welcome. My name is Jeanine Spence. I am an 18-year veteran of Microsoft. There I ran design and research teams in the mostly on incubation and V1 products. And in that process did a lot of research with customers, became very involved with customer-focused design and helping my whole engineering team really understand how to include customers into the process, the product development process. In the last few years, I've gotten very involved in inclusive design and looking at ways that we can bring in more people to participate fully and have full access in our software and services. I like to get started with an activity. So I'm going to have you do a few things in pairs and maybe some small groups this afternoon. So first, think back to your childhood. Put yourself back in that time. And think about your favorite kind of play. And so this could be structured, team, at a playground, those types of things. So think about your favorite kind of play. And I want you to think about, why was it your favorite? And then turn to somebody next to you and share your favorite kind of play and why was it your favorite? Okay, so take a moment to do that. Is you right there? Okay, now you guys are way more awake than the group was this morning at 8 a.m. So now what I want you to think about is, who was excluded from that play? Not intentionally, but who was excluded and why were they excluded? We're going to switch things over. So I want you to think about who was excluded from the play, your favorite kind of play, and how could it be made more inclusive? How could you bring more people in? All right, and again, talk in your pairs for a moment. Okay, so I know we're missing our prompts. So who was excluded and how to make it more inclusive? Okay. All right. So did you feel like you were able to start to get a little bit of perspective on how something like this might relate to your day-to-day life? And how it could relate to when you're creating something that you expect people to use. Playground is an odd place to start out when you're going to talk about software and services, but it's a way to make it personal. So things that you enjoyed in your childhood, other people may not have had access to. But the key part is childhood play brings up the idea of motivation. So what were some of the motivations that you remember from your childhood about why you played a certain activity? Any thoughts? Anybody want to share something? Acquiring new insights? Yeah. Socializing? Uh, exercise? Hmm? Not socializing, yes. Yes, there are two very different types of play. Yeah. Times to work by yourself and then time to socialize. So a wide range of really fundamental human motivations come out in play. And when we're thinking about inclusive design, it's important to remember that we all share these motivations, but we all bring different experiences, different abilities to that activity. So this idea is where inclusive design is not about building one thing for everyone, but being thoughtful about how to provide different ways for people to participate in their own manner, and again focusing on what is that motivation or what is the thing that you want people to be able to accomplish. This is a picture from my hometown of Seattle. And this is an example of the kind of play that is inclusive of a lot of different ways of participating. And I know there's a number of different cities have these kinds of parks or interactive areas. So I want to point out a few things that are happening. There's just in the proximity to the water, people are choosing how wet they want to get on a hot summer day or not. And so people are choosing what distance they want from the water. There's a lot of people around the edge who are observing. So they're participating in the play in a vicarious manner. And when you're at a playground, you notice children doing that as well. Not everybody is fully engaged in the play. For some people, for some children, the activity is watching. All right. So inclusive design, the idea of opening it up to more people to participate more fully is an example here of a product created by Farber. He started out making this product for his wife who had severe arthritis and was having trouble holding kitchen tools. Is this a familiar product? And I apologize up front. My deck is very US centric, the examples in there. So after the talk, if people have other examples, I really welcome them. It's my limitation of not knowing a lot of different areas of the products around the world. So this is an example of kitchenwares. This is a company called OXO. So the idea was to create products that worked for people who had arthritis or had trouble gripping and controlling the kitchen implements. It has since grown into a very successful, very large company. And for businesses, the takeaway here is that they're able to charge twice as much for the same potato peeler as a more generic, less ergonomically friendly potato peeler. So that's one of the ways in which thinking about who is excluded from using a tool can lead to new innovation. Another example is a trap that we often fall into, and there's a lesson in here as we start looking at big data and using big data and machine learning to drive a lot of analysis over what people are doing. You have to be careful about what you're measuring. So in the 1950s, the US military all of a sudden started noticing that they had a spike in deaths of their fighter pilots. The innovation around that time was the switch to fully to all jet planes. And in that process, the military had decided that they were going to do this extensive survey or study of people, mostly in this case men and enlisted men in the military, of all the measurements, and they were going to come up with the average man. Well, they were losing in one day in particular was a particularly bad day. They lost 17 planes, and the pilots were either perished in the accident or ejected in one day. 17. Now think about the enormous cost of that, from the training of the pilot to the airplane, and the tragedy of loss of human life, and that's certainly not sustainable. So it was a little bit of a wake-up call. They brought in a researcher to look at, well, we did all this work, we figured out what the average was. Why are our planes, our pilots should be the best, they are the best trained, so they should be the best performing. So the research proceeded to measure all of the pilots on a bunch of different measurements. So say the length from the fingertip to the elbow, and the height and length of legs and torso, and to figure out, okay, well, how do we make this plane better? And so they decided that there were 10 key measurements, and they went out and studied all the pilots. How many pilots do you think fit all 10 of those measurements? None. Okay, well, how about 3 of the measurements? I mean, these are averages, right? How many pilots fit 3 of the measurements? No, not 50%, 0. Nobody was average. And we think about people as being on a curve of some kind of average. Well, there's a little trick that happened in the analysis. They were looking at taking something where you would measure, say, this idea of averaging a bunch of measurements coming out of astronomy, where you're measuring a bunch of different times where you're measuring some astronomical phenomenon, and translating it into saying, well, if I measure you, and I measure you, and I measure you, I get some meaningful average. But we forgot about the individual in that process. And so the wrap up to the story is just simply that they said, okay, well, we're not going to find the average. What if we made specific areas of the cockpit adjustable? And sure enough that they went to 10 different measurements, 10 different movements that you could adjust in the cockpit, and it opened it up to more pilots. And now, many years later, women are actually able to be fighter pilots as well in the cockpit, fitting that range. So take a moment now, and I'm just going to ask you to do a little bit of personal reflection. Where are places in your life where you have encountered barriers? Encountered barriers. Where have you experienced a barrier for you when you wanted to do some activity or participate in some activity? I think for all of us, at some point in our lives, we've experienced some kind of barrier. And taking that appreciation into the work that you do is an important way to be able to build a practice of inclusion. The next part of that is really learning from diversity. Seeking out people who are different from you, people who have different lived experiences, and learning. So in that vein, I'd like to introduce you to Haben Girma. She is a disability rights attorney in San Francisco, and there's a video here that's part of the Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit that's available online on the Microsoft. You can find it on the Microsoft Design site. And this is one of a set of videos of interviews with people who bring really diverse and really interesting experiences into the realm of software design. So Haben Girma will tell you all about her experience. Oh, I apologize. When we made that last switch over, the audio didn't come through. Let's see. Should we try this? Let's try this one here. Nope. Could we get audio fixed?
Be the same thing as before. That
No, it's not.
Probably it's not going to.
It's not working. Oh, there. Let's try that.
Pact litigation and community education.
She walks with her guide dog in San Francisco.
Part of community.
Okay, we'll start that over again.
Titles: Inclusive, a Microsoft Design Toolkit. Haben Girma, JD, Disability Rights Advocate. A quote: I am pioneering, imagining, and advocating.
My name is Haben Girma. I'm a staff attorney at Disability Rights Advocates, and we work to end discrimination against individuals with disabilities using high-impact litigation and community education.
She walks with her guide dog in San Francisco.
Part of community education is informing the tech community about things they can do to make technology more accessible for people with disabilities.
She rides an elevator to work.
When you design technologies for the disability community, you do deepen your understanding of what it means to be human. About 20% of Americans have some kind of disability, and the other 80% are temporarily able-bodied.
A coworker touches her arm.
So disability is something that can happen to anyone, and that's part of the reason why developers should prioritize accessibilities. My mother grew up in Eritrea. Many deaf-blind individuals can't get an education in Eritrea. We have more opportunities here in the United States because advocates have pushed to allow people with disabilities to participate and have full access to information.
She attends a conference.
Personally, for me, accessibility means, can I gain access to information? I think contextual intelligence would be extremely helpful for individuals who don't have immediate access to visual and auditory information.
Haben, first deaf-blind Harvard Law graduate.
When I was speaking to President Obama, he was typing on the keyboard, and I was reading on my Braille display, and he was communicating his words.
Obama hugs her. I couldn't type a hug.
I also wanted to have access to other information, like facial expressions. So I had a communication assistant who was relaying environmental information on my shoulder.
Haben climbs steps to a dance studio.
So yes, the body does become intelligent and learns to take in information. I do partner dancing like salsa and swing.
A young man leads Haben onto the dance floor.
And the partners who are leading the dance are able to communicate music and rhythm and movement through their bodies.
Haben's partner turns her in a spin under his arm.
It would be interesting to see how people who design technology can add more ways of using music and technology to communicate movement.
Later, they sit on a bench together. He types and she reads his words in Braille. They share a laugh.
Another thing I'm interested in exploring is surfing.
Haben stands on a surfboard, her instructor behind her.
As a deaf-blind person, I wonder if there are ways for people designing technology to design ways to gain information about the ocean, about other surfers around me, so that I could have some kind of waterproof device that would allow me to know when it's safe to go off for a wave, when it's time to stand up. So there's so many possibilities.
They sit down as the surfboard races onto the beach.
My question to people who design technology is, can you increase our ability to communicate emotions and make it easier for people to connect even more? This isn't for them. It's for you. It's for your family. It's for your friends and your coworkers.
At the dance studio, a man types a message.
Happiness depends on having good connections and being able to develop communities.
Haben officiates a wedding.
And if we can get technologies to communicate emotions and increase access to emotional information, I think we'd all be happier.
The bride and groom kiss. Haben applauds. On the dance floor, Haben's partner gives her a hug. Titles. This is part of a film series created to build empathy and inspire designers. Inclusive, a Microsoft design toolkit. A slanted light production. Microsoft.
Thoughts? What did you notice? Yeah.
A good solution would be instead of typing a message to the person that is blind and can't hear, is to speech recognition and then translate it to.
Yeah, yeah, so we've just watched a very short clip of Haben in the context of her day-to-day life, and already there's some technology ideas coming up. So she's very generous in sharing her thoughts about technology, and I really encourage people to follow her on Twitter. She is a advocate for disability rights and does a lot of work in the community that she lives in, as well as globally. So yes, so one of the things she talks about there is around emotion. So my question back to you, Haben gave her perspective on emotion and picking up emotional cues. The question back to you is, in what places in your day-to-day life is it hard to pick up on emotional cues? Are there certain situations in which emotional cues are missing or hard to get? Thoughts? Email. Where else? Text messaging. Yes, particularly if you have teenagers. Voice calls. Yes. Skype. Yes. And what's the consequence of missing those emotional cues? Things escalate, and not in good ways. Yeah. So one of the next steps we could take would be to say, okay, how might we learn from Haben and build better ways to pick up emotional cues? Right, so that would be one way in which you can learn from Haben's experience and apply it to your technology, and also find relevance in your day-to-day lives. So imagine if text messaging, because even emojis aren't really, they're trying a little bit, but boy, if you're not in the same cultural context, those emojis don't make any sense. All right, another example, closed captioning. Closed captioning was created in the 70s for a very specific use. The technology was expensive and hard to roll out at first. The devices were, in the beginning, the devices were expensive, and they were installed on individuals' home TV setups, and only a few stations broadcast an extra channel for closed captioning. Now we move forward a few decades, and closed captioning is everywhere. It's just built in. It's part of the hardware. So my question to you, another opportunity to reflect, where have you relied on closed captioning? Thoughts? The plane. Yeah. Anywhere else? Other languages? Oh, closed captioning. I apologize. It's what you saw in the Haben video. It's the text that appears below the image. Yeah.
When you're eating something fishy on the couch and watching a show, then I rely on closed captioning, otherwise I can't understand what
Yeah. Yeah, when you're eating and eating chips and eating something noisy, yep, and watching. Anybody a parent of young children? Yeah. Do you ever use closed captioning when your children are asleep? It's a good technique. Keep the noise down, particularly if you like adventure. The headsets are another way to do that. Yes, adventure movies. All of a sudden, the noise level goes way up. At the gym, in a sports bar. So closed captioning is all around us, and it was created for a very specific use to provide access to information for people who are deaf. but then it had all of these other carryover uses once the technology became readily available. All right, the other idea here that I'd like to convey is that sometimes when we create, simply just create the space for something to happen, that we make the technology open up new opportunities. And so in this case here with Starbucks, Starbucks rolled out a phone app for ordering. They used an inclusive approach. They wanted to, well, Starbucks obviously wants everybody to order coffee all the time. And in Seattle, you really can't escape it. We have lots of running jokes that are very cliche about the Starbucks on which corner Starbucks am I meeting you on, the southwest or the northeast at a particular intersection. But the idea here of creating an application to make it easier for people to order coffee made it possible for people for whom ordering in a high-pressure cafe environment with loud background noise and a lot of people behind you in line, for people for whom that was really stressful or difficult or impossible. And so you can order on in an application, and then you could just go pick it up. So people that might benefit would be people who are deaf, who are unable to see a menu up above. Never mind that the menus in Starbucks are completely worthless anyways. They don't really tell you all the options. Or people for whom anxiety and a crowd or pressure of people rushing by, people who are new to coffee, or that particular way of ordering coffee. So it opens up a bunch of different ways for people to participate in the experience. The other example I have up here is a true story. So Starbucks started rolling out these video kiosks at their drive-thru, or the video screens at their drive-thrus. So upgrading that experience, trying to create more of a connection between the barista and the person in the car. And this really happened at one of the Seattle area Starbucks. A customer who is deaf arrived at the kiosk and discovered that the barista knew sign language. And so the picture here is them communicating in sign for her to order her coffee. So that interaction all of a sudden is possible because the technology opened up the space for that. So you may not be creating technology specifically to do a particular thing, to provide a particular point of access, but by opening up that space, more things can start to happen. The concept of disability here is an important one to keep in mind. It's not about a personal health condition. About 15 years ago, the World Health Organization redefined disability from a personal health condition to a point where there's a mismatch between a person's abilities and the environment. And so that's why I was having you reflect on where might you have encountered some kind of barrier, because that's a point at which you've had a mismatch with the environment. And it could be any number of things. It could be a really loud restaurant, and you're trying to have an intimate dinner with your significant other, and you can't hear each other talk. That's a mismatch. Now, the mismatch is much more pronounced in a situation where one of the individuals is deaf, or that the noise level rises up too high. So let's take an example of how thinking about mismatches can translate into areas to find for product innovation. So here's a little story or an example. You're driving to pick up a friend. Road construction is blocking your route. You're stuck in traffic. Your friend is waiting in a loud cafe. So you have to change the meeting location or time. You can't type, nor should you be on your phone if you're driving. And your friend can't hear. And even if you're not driving, if you're in a situation where you're not able to type, you might want to call, but your friend can't hear you. So you've got two different types of mismatches going on. what could technology do? How could you communicate? And so you were pointing out already that there's ways, there could be ways of translating that. So technology has has a role to play in reducing the mismatches and thinking about what are the ways those mismatches could occur. And one way that mismatches occur is that you're in unequal situations on both sides. So people may be in different contexts. And the thing to remember also is we all go through an experience over time where we have different ways that we interact with the world. And so each of us is temporarily abled or disabled depending on life circumstances. So you might have an injury, you might be aging. There's a bunch of different ways in which your abilities or the way that you interact with the world change. And you can think about this in looking at there's permanent disability, temporary, and situational. And so we talked about a situational one where you're driving or in a place where you can't access your phone, and your friend is in a cafe where they can't hear you. A temporary one might be an injury. And so depending on how severe the injury is, you might be living with that for a shorter or longer period of time. A question often comes up around inclusive design is what's the relationship with accessibility? And accessibility is an absolutely essential and key part of thinking inclusively. One way to think about it is the better job we do designing inclusively, the more people who can participate in the result of our work from the get-go. There will always be a certain population that needs to have very specific adaptive technology. And so inclusive design, the expectation is that you don't build it so that the one thing isn't going to work for everybody, but there is an expectation that you build it so that it can work with adaptive technology. So you may not be building a screen reader in your product, but you should have your product work with existing screen readers. And there's a whole range of very personalized, very specific and targeted adaptive technologies out there. For design teams, it's a really important thing to remember. When you're working on in technology, your peer group or your cohort is generally going to be younger. And the tendency, particularly among designers, and I speak as a member of the design profession, the tendency is to think that everybody has very acute vision, like the young designers in the group. And the tendency then would be to design on that side, on the right-hand side of the curve, forgetting about the left-hand side of the curve. And so inclusive design gives you a deliberate way to think about including more people in that process. There are different ways that people become excluded from participating, and there's a range of different dimensions to think about. These are things that over time you just get used to including in your process. One of the ones that comes up often is around memory. So people who are struggling with dementia or Alzheimer's, being able to remember where something was put or what day it is or where they are. And so I'd like to take a moment and do another little activity here. I have a short story. This is culled from some research. So living with dementia can be difficult because I'm really forgetful. Since I get home at the same time every day, I have a phone alarm that reminds me to put my keys in their special spot. Today I got home earlier than normal and my reminder alarm didn't go off when I came in the house. I put my keys somewhere else and couldn't find them. For 4 hours my keys were lost and I missed an appointment. So why don't you pair up again, and I'd like for you to look at these three questions. What was this person trying to accomplish? What was the mismatch? What was the barrier that they encountered? And third, is there anything that's familiar in this story to you? Okay, so take a moment and discuss those three questions. Okay, all right. I'm cutting the activity short because we have a more compressed talk time. When I do workshops on inclusive design, we go through a whole bunch of different exercises like this to raise that understanding of what are some of those different dimensions that along which somebody could experience exclusion. And so this is one example. And very quickly in a short story, you can already come up with a lot of different ways that you could think about this as something that could solve this problem for a lot of people. So questions often come up as, what's the role of the key here? Is it actually that this person needs a key to get in and out of their house, or is it serving as a comfort or a memory trigger or some kind of grounding for somebody who has Alzheimer's? So there's a question there about what is actually going on. Did they actually need a key to get back in their home? And if they did, what are other ways that they could get in and out of their home without having a physical key? Or is it working as a memory trigger, and is there another way to tie, or some kind of comforting or grounding object? And is there another way to make a grounding or comforting object? And then the question is, okay, around losing keys, anybody who has had a teenager knows how often keys get lost, right? So it's not just somebody who's living with Alzheimer's, but other people forget or lose their keys. So there's different ways to start thinking about solutions that would not only help this person, but could help a range of people. The last set of dimensions I want to bring up very quickly here have very specifically to do with technology. And there's ways that people learn or approach technology that are important to remember. And we can think about these along a spectrum of ability. And so the first one is around technology motivation. Why is somebody using it? Is it because it's fun? Or is it something that they're looking at in a much more pragmatic way? And so there's a range of ways that people encounter or approach technology. Technology self-efficacy. And again, here's a range where people are looking at, is it something where they feel very effective? Are they very comfortable with it? Or is it something where they feel like it's almost impossible to use? And there's a range of experiences in there. Information threshold. This is the way in which, if you're going to make a decision about something, are you somebody who can make a decision based on one piece of information? Or do you need to sit back and absorb a whole bunch of information before moving forward? And then there's ways of learning. And so some people learn by doing, by tinkering. Other people like to have information presented in a structured way. And the example of the last one is one that comes up a lot in software. Well, actually, all of these were picked specifically because software and how people relate to it are really fall into these four categories, are very important. But the last one around tinkering, this can be a real barrier for people if you're asking people to put together pieces. We saw the challenges with just wiring up that extra monitor, that for some reason it went out. Or people need to have it presented in a clear and structured way. And so when you're working in a group that's focused on technology, chances are that the people around you are really comfortable with tinkering. So you need to be careful that you're not building that in to your software or service in a way that people who don't tinker, who want to have a structured way of learning, are unintentionally excluded. And so making sure that you reflect on what are you actually doing for people, or how are you supporting them. All right, I'm going to quickly wrap up here. Inclusion is an engine for innovation. And so this is why we want to be thoughtful about this, not just because it's good to include more people, but because it actually works to drive a broader market. So we have, again, I apologize, these are US-centric examples. Alexander Graham Bell developed the phone as a way of a hearing assisted device for people who are deaf. And pretty much I think all of us use phones nowadays. The typewriter was created by, let me get his name here. His name is Pellegrino Turri. And there were a lot of typewriters being developed, about mechanical writers being developed about the same time, but the story is that he developed this because he wanted his blind lover to be able to write him more legible letters. And so by typing them, he was able to read them more easily. We have Vint Cerf, who worked on the email protocol because his wife is deaf and he wanted to have an easier way to communicate with her. And then the last example is the use of the joystick. The technology around the joystick device came out of the use of NASA, where you had a bulky spacesuit and you needed to have fine motor control, but you didn't have finger dexterity. So there's just some examples of how inclusion can drive pretty transformative technology. An example here, the iPhone with the touch had a carryover effect for people for whom typing was very difficult, or also for whom taking a wallet out to pay was difficult. And so with one touch, it required a lot less dexterity, and you had all of a sudden access to being able to pay easily and to log into your device more easily. So, in summary, inclusive design considers the full range of human diversity with respect to ability, language, culture, gender, age, and other forms of human difference. And as you go forward on this journey, you'll start to see ways that learning from all the different lived experiences around you can start to inform your designs as it comes together. So thank you very much.